we're living in a different world where like credibility and reach and so on is scattered. And that really changes the way we operate.
If we think about Europe as a whole, there's a lot of really amazing stories to be told here. We undersell ourselves a lot.
The elephant in the room from my perspective is media biased. The question for me is, what is media biased towards? And sometimes I feel it's biased towards access. Sometimes I feel like it's biased towards eyeballs or sensationalism.
I can guess what publication you're referring to. At the end of the day, media is a business. Eyeballs equal money. AI is definitely shaking things up. But when everyone's turning to AI, that's where the beauty of creativity and being human comes through.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Welcome to a special UVC podcast, because today you're all honored with my presence, which we all know is the best host for the UVC podcast, not that Danish guy who tries to live up to my standards, but we have to deal with him every now and then. So here we go. So welcome. Today we're doing a special episode with Cathy from CEW. Cathy will introduce herself in a minute, but we wrote this article recently. We co-authored it on the state of European tech media, and by co-authored, Cathy wrote everything, and I kind of basked in the glory of that article. I think that's quite fair to say. So we're going to talk a bit about that, kind of try to understand what's going on in media right now, and hopefully that generates some value to you. So please stay tuned. Cathy, can we start with quick intro? You've been a repeat offender on the UVC podcast, so people might know you, but just in case they haven't heard of you yet.
Yeah, well, I used to be that British female host that was featured on a podcast for a long
Our
while.
second best host, you mean?
There we go. Yeah, that Danish guy comes third, right? So yeah, Cathy, I'm the founder of CEW Communications. We're a European boutique agency specializing in working with early stage startups, scale ups, and VCs, touching everything technology. Big part of what we do is PR and working with media specifically, but we also do social media for LinkedIn, and we do content. And I've been doing this for 15 years, which is a long time now.
Yeah, it's time. Yeah. A little bit.
Yeah.
So as I said, we wrote this piece arguing that comms is now becoming infrastructure, not marketing, not PR, infrastructure. We use that word quite intentfully, let's put it like that. My personal opinion is that I don't see many founders or investors, or generally speaking players in our industry, thinking like that or behaving like that's true. So I want to kind of just, before kickstarting the conversation, I want to kind of pop up something in the screen here, which is basically this article we wrote. We got quite some nice feedback on it. And one of the things that we said here was really that, as I said, communications is becoming core infrastructure for European tech. So Cathy, with that kind of backbone, when you hear these words, when we wrote these things, what are you thinking? What's coming to mind? Why did you want to frame this topic like this?
Ooh. Well, okay. Like I said, I've been doing this for 15 years, so a really long time. And you see different hype cycles come through, right? So at the moment, we're in the big AI hype cycle. In the past, it's been data, it's been numerous other things. And we go through these waves. And I don't know. I think I come at it from a point of frustration. Just take AI as an example, right? So I think every single company that we're talking to at the moment, whether it's a new business prospect or it's an existing client, AI is part of the story. AI is part of the technology. And they're trying to, as much as possible, hinge their success on the fact that they are AI. From a storytelling point of view, that's bloody boring. It's really it is, because you're not standing out from anyone. And startups, particularly younger companies, when they're kind of in that pre-seed, seed, Series A, maybe up until Series B, PR and narrative and storytelling always sort of has felt like it's fallen into this kind of luxury bucket. So it's brought in when they have the budget to do it, but then when times get tough and cuts need to be made, it's often one of the first few things that they will cut back on. And it's frustrating because a lot of businesses do this. And actually, you see a lot of the more successful businesses sticking to narrative, sticking to storytelling, really embedding it across the whole company and seeing the value in it. So this is why the infrastructure piece kind of comes to mind. And if we think about Europe as a whole, with the many numerous different countries that we are and trying to compete with big countries like America, there's a lot of really amazing stories to be told here. And I think we undersell ourselves a lot. There's not enough confidence in telling European stories or for the companies, the founders themselves to do it. And this is kind of where we were coming from when, in terms of thinking about it, in terms of infrastructure. And the other big part of this right now is to go back to that point on AI. So ignoring the fact that we're telling the stories of too many AI companies, AI is also one of the ways in which we're finding these stories now. And there's even more of an argument for storytelling, narrative, content, PR, all of these different parts be a part of the company from the get-go because of all the positives you'll get on the AI side.
I actually have a little segment prepared for that, so we're gonna cover that one in a bit more depth. And I brought a case study, which is our own company, which I think you're gonna enjoy, Cathy.
Oh, yeah.
So we're gonna look at it. We, in our article, we focus a lot on clarity. We focus a lot on narrative. So it's not like we're saying, "Oh, poor Cathy needs more clients. Come get PR services." No, we're saying is, well, of course, there's times where you need external assistance. There's time when it's too early. There's time where you might need to hire someone, and these are different company development phases. But what we are really arguing here is like how transversal this is to your company growth trajectory and kind of how it matters in a very changing and different media landscape. And Cathy, I think you'll enjoy this. I prepared a little presentation on what changed in European tech media. And to keep it very topical, this is 99% AI made. So obviously, I didn't spend 5 hours doing it, but I thought this is kind of interesting to bring in, because this is what we said in the article. And Cathy, I have some bits here when I want to ask you to comment and I want to ask you questions, but feel free to interrupt me. I think what we're saying here and what we argued in our article was that, you know, we're living in a kind of a different world where like credibility and reach and so on is kind of scattered. And that really changes the way we operate as founders, as investors, as comms professionals, as PR professionals, everything, right? Or even as people I'm interested in tech. Where do I go to get that content, right? It used to be quite easy to answer that question. Nowadays, I don't think it's that easy, to be frank. And so that's kind of the first bit of article. That's kind of what we're saying, where, you know, we used to have a world where getting one article in the right publication basically validated you. Well, that's kind of gone. You know, it was an easy and simple world, right? One voice, one moment of validation, and the rest is history, right? I want to stop here and ask you a question, Cathy, which is, you're engaging with a lot of founders and investors around comms, right? Do you still see this mindset? Do you still see this mindset of, I'm chasing that one big placement because getting featured on name media outlet, whatever that is going to really make a difference? Do you still see that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand it, right? Because certain publications, if you're able to do it, they can make a serious impact. However, we're in a landscape where media's changed. The competition to land a story is significantly higher. You know, often for startups and VCs, that kind of one big hit would be something around like a funding announcement. And in today's landscape, that's significantly harder to place in a top tier outlet. You know, it's one of those classic things, you know, you see like someone's success story on LinkedIn or something, and you're like, oh, well, they're so lucky, but you don't actually see all of the work that's gone into getting that. It's the same with those one big hits. So while it might look like they just got the FT or they were just featured in TechCrunch, you don't know that actually, you know, they've been placing stories for 6 months in trade media, in smaller publications, building a profile, making arguments, talking frequently to journalists in order to land that one big hit. And so the one big hit mentality is very old school. Yes, they can still make a difference, but it's not a very strategic way of doing public relations or even thinking about media relations specifically.
What if we bring in this again, going to pop up a little visual here. This idea that, now it's kind of with this creator economy plus AI boom, whatever. As I wrote here, a Substack with 12,000 engaged readers can move the needle faster than a legacy outlet with 10x the audience. How are you seeing that play out? How are you seeing that affect, basically tech media?
Yeah, well, it's true, right? Now, the big thing to do, if anyone listening is thinking about, PR for their own company, is take a step back. First of all, qualify who is the audience that you're actually trying to get in front of, right? Like, if you want to land a massive enterprise contract, then okay, fine. It probably still makes sense to maybe be talking to the Financial Times and really working on trying to land something with them. But if you're going for the people within an enterprise that you might be able to sell to directly, then Substacks are super valuable. It's what you need to do is really like sketch out the media that you should be talking to based on the audience that you want to reach. And when you're talking to that media, you need to be creating stories for the audience. So a story that the journalist is going to recognize, or the person writing the Substack is going to recognize as having value to their reader, their viewer, their listener. All of these things are helpful, useful, and great to do. But this is why you need to take a much bigger, broader strategic approach in terms of what you're doing, rather than going after just the one-hit wonder. Fire on all cylinders if possible.
This is kind of this is that topic of fragmentation, right? Where, as we just said, a couple of years back, there's a couple of outlets. Now it's like just to map them is a nightmare, frankly, right? Just to know what's going on across Europe is a nightmare. I wanted to ask you a question. So we discussed a bit in the article as well, this Europe versus US topic, which is a topic I love and hate. But in a way, my feeling is that right now the European landscape feels more like a network and less so of an industry, right? Because of the regionality of it, because our journalists here, many of them are also creators, so they wear like multiple hats. Some do other stuff as well, and that I feel like it's much more relationship driven. Whilst in the US, I think it's like much more professionalized. There's still a couple of large editorial teams, more than one, to be frank, that are venture backed, that are built for reach. So it feels like it's quite different. Do you agree with that? Do you see that inform or affect how operators should think about media, generally speaking?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, look, I in the last couple of weeks, I've had coffee with a former journalist from Sifted who now freelances as a writer, does podcast production, but also is working on the PR side for a VC, doing ghostwritten content for them, and also working with a scale up and trying to place wins with the CEO. So it's this multitude of different things that are going on, and they're actually all quite nicely complementary to one another. And we know in Europe in the last 18 months, probably more at this point, there's been quite a lot of publications covering the startup and tech space that have disappeared, had layoffs, or just significantly cut the team, or even just been acquired, and then suddenly AI is writing all of the stories. So it's a big, crazy mix. But then you have new things popping up, right? So ETN on the more video broadcast side of things, huge amounts of Substacks. And you're right, there's lots of journalists out there, even those that are writing full time for a publication, that also have a Substack. And I totally get why they're doing that, right? Because they need to have something that gives them an edge and that protects them in a world where media is changing and they might be laid off tomorrow. We don't know, right? So yeah, the way of getting stories out there is different. It does involve more networking. Like, I feel now in the last couple of years, there's definitely been a little bit more of that kind of, if I rub your shoulder, you rub mine, help each other out kind of thing. And it also means that, myself, even as a comms professional, you sort of end up taking on a little bit more of like this hybrid role. I've been helping journalists and contacts that are journalists but do multiple things with getting them coverage for their clients to help them out, right? So it's all really, really different. In America, there's money. media's got money, bluntly. I mean, yes, there are still layoffs and yes, there are still problems, but compared to Europe, they're backed, they've got advertisers, they're more protected, and it does mean that they can be more professional. But there's also still this layer of people doing Substacks, people doing podcasts, people doing
Yeah, of course.
things,
Yeah.
right?
Some of the Substacks, blogs, podcasts, whatever that most of us look up to are US, right? So that's really not the point. It's just more like as you said, it feels like the media industry is more insulated from that in a way.
I think the other thing is to think about it in terms of volume, right? So, I talked to a couple of journalists this week. We're starting a new podcast ourselves, doing one-on-one interviews with them, like to literally get the download of what it is that they're looking for right now and how to work with them, because it's all changing. And one of the journalists I spoke to from TechEU, she said, my inbox, she's very diligent. She reads every email that she gets, but she's getting 150 to 250 pitches every single day. Right? You look at that total number and then you look at the output, the number of actual articles. Right? They've got to be super selective. It's all about hitting them at the right time with the right notes, giving them enough notice. Now, that's a European inbox. Imagine what an American publications inbox is going to look like. It's going to be significantly larger. So yeah, the professionalism will be different.
Yeah. And I actually don't know the answer to this. I don't know to what extent traditional media companies are already embedding AI into their own workflows. But if and when they do, because they will eventually, that also affects all of this, right? Because like those 250 emails, I think, as you said, it's fair to assume that if it were a US publication, that would be 5 times more, maybe 10. How can you sift through that? Well, there's this thing called AI that helps with that, right?
Yeah. But, just on this note, because I had this is something else that came up in the last week. It also means that when we're emailing journalists, which is traditionally, and that is the key way to pitch most of them, right? It's pitch over email. The subject line has to be perfect to work for AI searching as well as human searching. So actually, one of the tips that I was given from them is, shorten how much is in that subject line, use keywords, because fine, their story might not be something they want to cover right now. However, that business and whatever they do, if the keyword is there and they're writing something a month or 2 or 3 months from now, they can find it much faster. And AI will also be looking at it in that way.
That's a good little tip. I like that. So that's a tip for the attentive listener. So this is kind of, what changed in European tech. I think, in terms of key takeaways, Cathy, yeah, I have 4 in my mind. So I think one for me at least is like this idea that legitimacy is earned, not assigned. So this idea that you can't have this kind of one moment where you do a big sprint of comms and then you have trust and legitimacy and blah blah. Like that's not how media is working right now. Second is this relational topic where Europe's media is still very relational. Third one is this fragmentation we've been talking about demands a new playbook, and you just shared a couple of tips, right? And this idea that we have the native tech presses, independent newsletters, and content creators, podcasts, right? This recent trend, like 5-year-old or whatever. And then the final one is this one big hit instinct is a trap. Would you highlight anything else on this topic of what has changed in European tech media?
Well, I think, okay, so one other thing, then this is key for kind of VCs and startups that might be listening, is the funding announcement, right? So for us, even as an agency, the funding announcement is typically when we would first engage with a company, even just on like a one-off, because you want to get something out there. Maybe it's a moment to also launch a product, et cetera, et cetera. There's still a reason to communicate it, but there are fewer publications that will bluntly give a shit anymore about it. They want real stories, and money is a great validator. And that's why it's still important to kind of use these stories. But where founders and VCs really need to put more effort into is to really think about what is the human narrative? What is the story that people will really care about? So industry to a point, yeah, fine. We want to know funding. We want to know who's involved, yada, yada, yada. Beyond that, you've got to find a way to humanize your company and what you're doing. And, we're talking about comms as infrastructure and providing more clarity. Well, that goes across every single role within a business. It's really, really key for the founder, the CEO, whoever might be leading. You need to be able to humanize what you're doing as well. And that transcends channels. So it's really important for media in terms of storytelling. But, this is bluntly just everyone should learn to be a storyteller. And actually, to this point, it's worth noting that quite a few more large businesses in the world in the last 6 months, they are hiring storytellers. They want people to come in that help to create the story for the business. For a long time with the rise of AI, even for PR professionals and journalists, we've all been looking at this going, oh, like, are we going to have jobs in a few years? And I think AI is definitely shaking things up. But when everyone's turning to AI, that's where the beauty of creativity and being human comes through. And that's why you have more businesses looking at bringing storytellers into their ranks.
Yeah. On this, this kind of feeds from what we just discussed, like this idea of coverage versus presence, right? For me, as an example, what I see with our own company, we're a podcast, we have a newsletter as well, but podcast is our core, and we're always out there with some kind of content. I don't necessarily think of our content as marketing. I think of it more as building trust, building relationships, building presence, right? It's fair to say that most can't afford to do the level of podcasting that we do. I wouldn't not recommend that to 99% of people out there. But how do you see people doing this? How do you see people creating this presence in the market in ways that you think are smart or that are effective? What would you say is kind of the playbook here?
Honestly, it's start small and layer up, right? Because you also think about this from the perspective of a founder, particularly. You have a finite amount of time, right? And different priorities depending on where you are in the cycle of the business. But building presence, simple, basic things like just be doing something on LinkedIn. Like that's bare minimum. In the grand scheme of things, the vast majority of people that see you doing something on LinkedIn probably aren't going to engage, probably aren't going to read it, but they saw that you did something. That's all you need, right? That's the basic level of presence. So, this is why we see more founders doing kind of build in the open, right? So actually like communicating what's going on at the business, doing the updates, etc., because that's one simple way of creating content frequently. Tie it to stuff that you're already doing. And then, like I said, layer from there. So, for instance, if we're working with a new client, one of the first things we would say to them is, right, we need to have a look and see what your general online profile looks like. Because from a journalist point of view or an event organizer point of view, if we're approaching someone on your behalf, well, they're going to stalk you on the internet, right? They're going to qualify whether you are the expert you say you are, what it is that you've done in the past, and why they should talk to you and not the other person. So fix your online profile, make sure it's up to date, get rid of old photos, etc., etc. But the other thing there is if you're active, i.e. you're posting on social semi-frequently, and someone else isn't. But when you're posting, you're sharing some actual insights and actual opinion, being a little bit bold in what you say, you're a much more appealing person to talk to. And this is where the kind of the layering effect happens, because the more you can just start even at that level, the more you're going to be approached by others to do other things, like a podcast, like a little interview, like a comment. And then as you grow, scale. So if you're adding more people to your team, you have a little bit more free time, or you have the ability to employ someone that works on digital marketing, whatever it might be, delegate and make the next thing happen. And this is where you also, I think, need to be willing to experiment. You're early enough, particularly as a startup, that unless you really f up, no one's going to give a crap, and you can learn from that and you can do something else. It's not going to, it's not like a 10,000 person strong company goes, hey, we're launching a newsletter. You're starting from a very different level, and you've got more ability to experiment. And
the way I see it is many of the best founders and investors I see and I engage with, they don't really rely on media that much. They build the distribution themselves. In Europe, LinkedIn, in the US, Twitter or X, they're probably the most important media platforms in tech, right? It's kind of crazy when you think about it, that you can outcompete traditional media by just being consistent, clear, and I think I agree with you, right? It's about just starting and keeping that recurrency, right? Whenever someone comes to me with, oh, we're thinking of doing a podcast, we need to do X, Y, Z. I'm like, no, you need to write the script for the first 6 episodes. Like, just do that, right? Who are the first 6 guests? Write the script and do 2 recordings, and then let's talk. I don't know. Do you think there's still space for founders and investors to build that distribution, or is there a point where there's also like a bit of a capacity issue here of there's no, like, you know what I mean? Like, the space is taken.
Yeah, I mean, well, we hear this all the time, right? Like, like I just said, we're starting a podcast at CEW, and I would love for people to listen to it, obviously, but I'm also going to be realistic, right? Like, I've got to go out of my way on the marketing side to push it. But, with a podcast, for instance, there's numerous other reasons to do podcasts. So yes, an audience is fantastic. And yes, it's great if you can grow it. But again, that presence piece, or, if you're a company doing a podcast, it's an opportunity to bring on potential customers, potential partners. You're building relationships with these people, right? Going back to that network effect. People say that everything is saturated already. Bullshit. Like, just, we're human. If we see interesting content, we will watch it, read it, look at it, right? It's just trying to find a way to stand out from the crowd. I don't think we've reached full saturation levels. It would just be jumping on what's hot right now, in a way.
Yeah. Okay, I want to make it spicy now, and get us in trouble here. I feel, this is my personal opinion. It's not Cathy's. I will see what her is in a minute. But a lot of the tech media, and by that I mean the people, the individuals, they're very, very close to the ecosystem. Because in venture, whether it's media or investing, access is the name of the game. And access changes how you write. I'm not a writer, but if I were to write about an investor that I'm very close to versus an investor that I don't know that well, it would definitely change how I wrote. The elephant in the room from my perspective is not, is media biased? The question for me is, what is media biased towards? And sometimes I feel it's biased towards access, and I think that's not truth. So I think that's very common on the more creator side, podcast side, community side these days. But also on the opposite spectrum, sometimes I feel like it's biased towards eyeballs, or in other words, maybe a less nice word, sensationalism. Also not truth.
I can guess what publication you're referring to.
What's your take? What's your take?
I think at the end of the day, media is a business, right? So particularly the publication I think you're alluding to, they're venture-backed, might be running out of money. You eyeballs equal money, right? So you want to be always thinking about, first of all, the readers that you really do have and what it is that they're looking for, but also how do you attract more readers? And sometimes that means, if business isn't performing as well, then yes, they could slip. And there's a lot of ethical debate that you could raise around that. However, as long as the publication is being factual, not slanderous, anything like that, then they haven't technically broken any journalism rules, right?
What are the journalism rules? I think we hear about it. I've never studied journalism, right? So I don't know. I have like a guess, but what would you say in your playbook? What are the journalism rules?
Okay, well, first of all, everything should technically be based on fact, right? There has to be evidence, proof of some form, and that can come through talking to people. But obviously, people sometimes have their own agendas, and this is where things get a little bit sketchy. I mean, technically, all articles should be balanced, right? That's technically. In truth, they're not. And you'll see this more, for instance, less necessarily with something like the tech media. But if you were talking like a national publication, then yeah, you're going to have some form of political party sway. And, that will normally often come from who owns it, who is controlling the money, and who is spending. the money.
We see this a lot in the US already in tech
Yeah,
media, not in
it's
Europe,
scary.
because as you said, there's not enough money in European tech media for this to happen. But we see it, right? It's very clear.
Yeah. I mean, and it's scary. But then, this is where not only like founders and VCs and stuff need to be aware of it, but just like the average reader. And actually most readers aren't aware of it, right? And that's why it's where you said it could be spicy, right? It's when they're dumb and we have issues in the world. It's manipulation at that level, right? It's propaganda. Stepping back into more kind of tech and business stuff, yeah, okay, fine, that exists there as well. But technically in journalism, it should be balanced. If a claim is being made against a business or against an individual, they should have an opportunity to respond. Journalists have to have given them the opportunity to do that, even if the business or the individual doesn't. And that needs to be clear in the article as well. Now, that's what we're used to in the UK, across Europe, technically in America, but different countries, different cultures, different rules. For some countries in the world, media isn't earned, media is paid.
And it gets, when we shift from traditional media to more like independent voices, content creators, Substack, blogs, blah, blah, waters get really murky there, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I put myself in that bucket, by the way, but it's much less clear because these people are not necessarily...
Well, they're not journalists.
There you go. Yeah.
That's it. They're not journalists, right? It's different. We're talking content creation, and that comes with opinions. Journalists have them too, obviously, but they're meant to be more balanced. Whereas you can be as spicy as you want, David.
Sometimes. We still have shareholders. I'm kidding. We talked a bit about AI, and you mentioned a bit about like how people get information, how people find stuff, like discoverability, generally speaking. Like, we're starting to see more people asking less on Google, as an example, searching less on Google, and asking more on pick AI tool you love, right? And this, of course, affects as a company when you're thinking about how you're perceived and when people think of you and kind of inbound and whatnot. This affects how you think. So I did a little exercise, Cathy.
Oh yeah.
And I went on, and this is a very dumb exercise, but I thought it would be a nice way to frame this this conversation.
Okay.
So I asked ChatGPT and I asked Perplexity, what is EUVC? And now, before I read out the answers, like, let's just bear in mind, EUVC puts out one podcast every day or every 2 days for 5 years. So the amount of content out there, everything has a transcript, right? It's crazy when you think of it. So the amount of times I have briefly explained what EUVC is, or Andreas has briefly explained what EUVC is, I think it's fair to say it's more than the average company in terms of comms. And still, when I read this, Cathy, I'm like, that's kind of not true. Like that's 50% true, right? So ChatGPT says that EUVC is a platform and community focused on European venture capital. 3 things: content, community, capital, and deals. It's not inaccurate, but it's not really accurate. It's not our positioning. Let's put it like that. And then Perplexity.
Just for the listener as well. What should it be?
Yeah. So the first line is somewhat correct, right? So EUVC is and aspires to be as well kind of the go-to platform for European tech, right? So we started with venture capital. That's our history, but that's not where we are right now. And yes, then we have a media side to it. We have an education side to it. And we have an event side to it. And yes, we do investments in the background, but I don't talk that much about it, right? So for some reason, it finds it. So it's not off, right? It's close enough. And Perplexity actually gets it worse, right? So it says it's a media and community platform focused on European venture capital. It is a community of investors centered on European venture, a content platform with podcasts and written insights, and an events and networking brand hosting summits, awards, and other gatherings for the European venture ecosystem, blah, blah. And then it can mean other stuff. It's not bad. But the reason I bring this up is the amount of content we put out there that is findable and searchable for AI and whatnot is a lot. And I still, as a founder, I look at it, I'm like, that's not on point. Like, that's really not on brand. That's not what I would like a random person asking ChatGPT what we are about. That's not what I would like them to get. So, I'm just using that example because I thought it would be a cool example. But for the average company, how would you navigate this? Like, how would you think about the how this AI trend is now affecting the way people find out about our businesses, about our pitches, products, blah, blah.
Okay, so one question before I answer that.
Yeah.
What were the sources on those searches?
Okay, so ChatGPT on mobile doesn't give us that. On Perplexity, it told me it reviewed 10 sources. Some LinkedIn stuff, about page on our website. It reviewed something that's completely off topic, which is abbreviations.com. Which is completely off.
Yeah. What else could EUVC mean?
Exactly, yeah. It reviewed our Apple Podcasts pages, which is funny because we focus on Spotify actually.
There you go.
Because we're European. It reviewed everend.com, no idea what that is. Company's House.
Okay.
That's how it knows about investing side, I guess.
Yeah.
Substack, not our Substack, just Substack, and it reviewed Isomer because we're mentioned on the website. So those were the 10 sources that they worked on.
Okay, so but this is an interesting exercise, right? And this is something that any business should be looking at. So if you are asking any of the AI search engines out there, for information about your company, go and actually have a look and see what it's pulling from. If it is something that you own or you update, you can go and update it.
Clean it up, yeah.
Exactly, right? So the basic level of cleaning that stuff up. And then really what they're going to be pulling from as well is sources that are credible. So any media publications would fall under that bracket. And that's why, media still has a part to play because they are a credible, trusted source. So, if a business is changing what they do or how they talk about themselves, it's worth thinking about how they then get that reflected in news stories in media. Now, I gave you a teaser to this yesterday, but I had an interesting conversation recently with a Newswire service. I'm aware they were trying to sell me their service, so there's the little asterisks around that as well. But what they were arguing was interesting. So,
Cathy, sorry, what's a Newswire service? Many people might not know.
Oh, yes. So a Newswire service, basically, if you have a press release that you want to get out into the world, a Newswire is a way of distributing it. So you pay the Newswire service and it will send it out to as many publications, newsrooms as possible that are registered with that service, basically. It's a little bit...
You would buy that because they have the database of contacts and they have the right email to send it. Is that why?
It's not an email. Yeah. So they send it out on the wire. So it would just be distributed to anyone that receives that wire. Now, it's not necessarily the greatest way to get news out into the world because it's a bit more of like a spray and pray method. Where it's helpful is if, say, for instance, you're a publicly listed company or something like that, then you can put something on the wire. It will be distributed to newsrooms. It will be published online in particular websites, and they will be cited. They will be used as sources basically for AI. Usually, I mean, we tend to avoid using them because, again, like I said, it's spray and pray. It's not a very clever way of getting stories to journalists. But in some instances, they do make sense. Now, the argument that they made to me was, if companies are looking at how they have better GEO, whatever you want to call it, that's another argument for why newswires should be used. So if you, for instance, have a story going out, you can combine the two efforts. You can have the classic approach of go and talk to journalists and actually pitch them bespoke stories. And then the day the announcement goes out, you have a newswire, distribute it wide as well, and then it will be spotted online. So the short summary is basically use the AI search engines to have a look at what is being said about your business, but look at the sources and then see what it is that you need to fix. And then if you are changing your positioning or you're adding more products, et cetera, you just need to be making sure that you're making that very clear across lots of different channels over a consistent amount of time so that it turns up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we wrap things up, founders, what do you see them getting wrong? Like, what would be like top 2-3 things that you see recurrently that you wish people knew better or didn't do? Are you able to kind of summarize it?
I mean, 3 is a really short list. I have like 100.
Well,
Yeah,
we
I'll
have 5 minutes. So.
I have 5 minutes. Okay. No, but the ones that I think, okay, so first of all, your messaging is not a story. So, when we work on press releases or something like that, there's always going to be key messages that a business wants to get across. You've got you have no control over whether that's going to end up in a journalist's story ultimately. They want a story. Your verbatim, this is what we want to say about ourselves, isn't what they necessarily want to cover. So the first thing for founders is really think, again, like we said earlier, think about narrative. Think about how you humanize what it is that you're doing. And just making an announcement from the company is not the only reason to be talking to media. So that's number one. Two, you need to be much more prominent for the business. So like we said, if you have a bit more of an online profile, whether that's through social or, just popping up in the media a little bit more, from a journalist point of view, they need an argument for why they should talk to you and not talk to someone else. So make yourself more visible so that you're much more appealing from a press point of view, from a speaking point of view, from an awards point of view. It's all connected. And then the final one is honestly say something new, bold, different. First of all, you're a startup. You can afford to not play it safe. It's the whole point of having a startup. So really make sure that you're bringing that into everything that you do. No one wants to talk to an expert who says the same thing as everyone else. They want to talk to someone who's going to have some edge. They're going to say something new. So don't be afraid to rock the boat a little bit.
Yeah. On that note, if you're listening in and you think like narrative, storytelling, distribution, comms execution is a challenge, definitely reach out. We've had the pleasure of working with Cathy on a couple of projects. Very good feedback, which I think is very important in this space. There's a lot of players out there, so it's always good to have a trusted referral. We're happy to refer CEW and Cathy specifically. As a wrap up,
No.
the way I would frame it is no spiciness in the end. I don't see it as European tech has a storytelling problem, even though we don't see a lot of strong narratives and original thinking. I do think it has a consistency problem. I do think that's what I see, at least. And I think what's really exciting, kind of zooming out from like state of tech media to state of tech, like what's really exciting is we're actually really good at building stuff.
Yeah.
Right? From a technical standpoint, we're really good. I think we're not so good at explaining it. And so that's kind of what we're seeing and what we ended up talking a lot about, I guess, especially in a world where attention is more fragmented, as you said, and machines are mediating discovery, right? We just did it with my own company and I was like, not super happy with it. So I can imagine if you're doing a industrial deep tech company out of a small city in Europe, it's probably going to be worse. Yeah. So, just make things easy to understand and just be clear about it. Cathy, any final words of wisdom?
I think, I don't know if this is wisdom, but we're talking about discovery of your own business when it comes to using AI search. But remember, if this is the way that people are now starting to search for things, they're also going to apply it to people. So, Cathy White is a really freaking common name. You got to think about how you as an individual are found as well and connected back to the business. So as an experiment, I would say go and chat GPT or Perplexity.
Chat GPT yourself in your company.
And see what comes up. I'm still competing with a woman that had an affair with Jay-Z and got killed by Beyonce, apparently. So, that's where I'm at.
Don't know if you're going to win that battle, Cathy. I'm sorry.
No, probably not. I've got to do something quite extreme. I don't know what that is yet.
On that note, Cathy, thank you for your time. Talk to you soon. And thank you everyone for tuning in. If you think I'm a better host, put it in the comments. Say David is a better host.